We had one of our partners here, a delivery service provider. He had drivers that did deliveries. These drivers traditionally would just clock in, clock out. They would churn through, and it was just tough to motivate them, to get them to show up. And when they were able to talk about their education program, and these folks started getting into those education programs, people started saying, oh my gosh, like I can do this. I can get a better job. I can do something different. There is a career for me here. And I don't have to stay as a guy lifting packages for the rest of my life. I can do something different. Then a learner just recently completed their IT certification course and got a job at an IT firm. And what's funny about that is you would think that the delivery service provider, the employer, would be like, oh, I can't believe you're leaving me. But how happy the delivery service provider was for that employee, because they know them. It's actually somebody they know. And to see that person suddenly go from somebody that felt like they couldn't care and that they were stuck to somebody that felt like they had hope and was grateful for that hope, excited about the prospects of the future. Like I do think education, honestly, is hope for the future.
Hello and welcome to the Emerge Product Market Fit Academy series, where we're joined by leading founders and operators in edtech to share practical insights and advice for early stage founders. If you're building the future of learning and work, then this is for you. I'm your host, Zara, and I'm joined by our guest today, Jonathan Lau. Jonathan is an experienced edtech founder, consultant, product leader, and global technology investor. He is the co-founder and COO of InStride, which partners with corporations to provide strategic workforce education programs, advancing employee careers and improving social equity. Jonathan has built out InStride into a double bottom line company, which we'll hear more about later, that has been profitable, grown double digits since inception with more than 150 employees. Prior to InStride, Jonathan was a senior vice president and general manager of skills at Cengage, and leader in higher education, where, among other achievements, he led the $300 million skills group, reinvigorating a 350-plus person organization. There, he also launched Cengage Unlimited, a subscription service to significantly lower the cost of textbooks, which required reskilling 400 employees to take on new roles. Before Cengage, Jonathan was a leader in the technology, media, and telecom group at Temasek, a $200 billion investment firm where he invested globally in over 20 companies, totaling $1.4 billion US. He was also a product manager at Microsoft and a consultant at McKinsey. Jonathan, you've done some incredible things both at and prior to InStride with this clear undercurrent of making an impact. So to start us off, can you tell us where this desire to make an impact comes from? And can you explain this concept of a double bottom line company and why you've built out InStride in that way?
Awesome. Hi, I'm Jonathan Lau. Zara, thank you so much for having me here. I'm very excited to be doing this. I spend most of my time on three things nowadays. One, creating the conditions for teams to do their best work. Two, innovating with these teams to solve challenging problems. And three, trying to remind organizations that people are their greatest asset. And like other assets, you need to invest in them to grow. So turning to your questions, when I think about impact with the capital I, it can feel very daunting. We do have a lot of problems in the world, unfortunately, that my kids will face. I have a 7 and 9-year-old boys, and I'm not as smart enough or hardworking enough to solve them all. So I took my little problem-solving hat and said, if I took a step back, what is a way that I can at least help solve many of these problems? And really, that's what led me to education. If we can have more people educated, then there are many more people that can help solve these problems. So really, education to me is hope for the future. And that's why I'm really excited about education and the big impact it has. When we talk about InStride, we really set it up, as you mentioned, to deliver both business and social impact. We wanted to set up a model whereby doing what we do, which is get more employers to pay for their employees' education, we're helping society while allowing us to fund our growth so we can do this for the next set of employers. That's one of the exciting things about the education industry. You're always doing something good. Our main investor is the Rise TPG Fund, and they're focused exactly on ensuring that not only are we measured on delivering financial results, but also on the social impact that we have. And in our case, it's relatively straightforward to measure the social impact because we are helping more people get access to education and get meaningful degrees, credentials, things that will boost their careers and boost their long-term earnings, and hopefully also just transform their lives.
I love that framing of working within education as this domino effect, that when you provide education to people, it enables them to go out and solve the problems that they're most passionate about. And with such a wealth of experience across different edtech models, I'm super excited to explore your learnings. We have a lineup of 4 key topics. One, how do you hone in on the problem that you're trying to solve? Two, how do you devise and validate a solution? Three, how do you make money in edtech? We'll cover both the monetization and the pricing strategy side. And finally, once you have a product, how do you approach go-to-market? Let's start with the first topic, the problem. So when approaching a complex problem, what methods or frameworks do you use to gain a deeper understanding of its root causes and find potential interventions?
Yeah, it's really interesting. When we think about the problem, one of the methods I like to use is 5 whys. And this really came about when folks were trying to figure out the root causes. So we use this a lot when we end up actually running into a problem, maybe in our tech stack or something goes down, and we keep asking the why to dig into questions. And it's probably actually a good methodology in general for curious people. And it probably came from the fact that if you have young kids, they ask these annoying questions where they answer, why does something happen? You answer that and say, why is that the case? And why is that the case? But I think it actually works really well in business as well as you're trying to figure out the problem to solve. So let's just take an example of how we thought about it with InStride. If you think about this increasing income inequality in the United States, that's just a fact. It's continued to grow. The rich get richer, the poor struggle, and that's growing. So why is that? One of the reasons is you have inequitable access to quality education. Different people have different education levels. Why is that? Because the cost of education is a barrier to many people, right? So the rich folks can afford great education or move to a very nice district with good schools, and folks that are less fortunate can't. Why is that? Because in many cases, education relies on individual income, or you got to take out loans to pay for it. Why is that? If you think a little bit about it, who's actually the beneficiary of a skilled learner? Corporations. And corporations aren't funding enough workforce education. And so then you say, why is that? And that's because corporations maybe don't see workforce education as a lever to achieve their business objectives. Because corporations are motivated by achieving financial goals or business objectives. And if they don't see a reason or an ROI to do it, they may not do it. So that might be an example of following a chain of problem that you might have started as a really big macro problem, and then breaking it down and really trying to figure out where you want it to be. And so then if you think about, depending on which part of that problem you want to solve, you could come up with very different solutions. For example, if you said, I think the biggest problem is income inequality in the US, you could say, we should just give everybody a universal basic income. But that would be a way of solving that very high level problem. And if you're the government, maybe you could do that. On the other hand, if you said, you know what, actually, I want to solve the next level, which is cost is a barrier to education. Maybe I should just give free education to everybody, right? And so that's a different way to then solve that problem. As InStride, what we did is we went down that path and we said, if corporations have money and actually it's in their best interest to do it, they just don't know that they should be doing it, maybe that's the problem we solve. And so we followed this chain of these 5 whys or however many whys you want to go down. And we said, well, here's like the problem we want to solve, which is how do we help corporations understand that by investing in their people and invest education, they are actually going to help them achieve their own business results. And our belief is that then it has a cascading effect upwards, that if corporations fund more education, then more people have access to education, where you take costs out of the barrier, which means that more people will have more access to quality education, which therefore hopefully will reduce the income inequality. So that's really one of the ways to think about the problem that you're trying to solve.
I love bringing that childlike curiosity back into finding the root cause and just digging deeper and consistently asking why. Let's move from problem to solution now. So once you've specified the problem you're solving and you've chosen which why you're tackling, I'd love to hear about your approach to building a solution. You've built multiple edtech solutions over the course of your career, tackling different problems from different angles, different contexts, both within a larger company and within your own startup. Do you follow any frameworks when you think about solution generation?
There's 2 ways to think about the solution piece. One is just, what are the types of solutions typically? And there's many types, but I generally think of them in 3 different ways. Either you have something that's better. Let's say you have a boot camp and you decide, I want to go do a boot camp with a job guarantee. So that's a better solution, right? A better mousetrap, right? And maybe you can charge more for it, or it's improving on the outcomes. And so that's something that's different. It could be faster. So I think many of our ed tech companies create tools or ways to build things, like a lot of these SaaS companies build better tools. So you might have an authoring tool that lets you maybe build content of some sort or author videos. And you have now an authoring tool with AI to actually make it auto-populate. Instead of building something and taking, let's say, 2 months to build, You might have a tool that makes it 2 days, and that's faster. So that's a great solution. And the third way to think about it is it's cheaper. So this is often the one that we think technology really helps as you scale. But an example for this, even on content, is you might have to pay for courses up front. The traditional model, you pay for course centers tuition. And then the MOOCs came on and said, you know what, it's free, right? And then you pay at the end if you want to convert, if you succeed, so on and so forth. So those are typically, I think, 3 ways, and they're not mutually exclusive. So you might be able to come up with something that's better and faster. And of course, if you can come up with something that's better, faster, and cheaper, you hit the trifecta. So I think that's one way, is just thinking about the types of solutions. And then as you think about those types, one of the frameworks, there's many different processes, whether it's design thinking, opportunity canvas, old-fashioned just brainstorm on a whiteboard, get your friends together and say, hey, what's all wrong? How do we go do this? One of the ways that I like to do it, because I'm an ex-consultant and a little frameworky, is I like this model called jobs to be done, right? And this came from Clayton Christensen at HBS. And the idea is that basically customers hire products or services to get a job done. And so if we can understand what is that job that customers are trying to go hire us to do, we can have a better understanding of ways in which we might be able to solve them and why that's a pain point. So in the same way, employers hire employees to do jobs, companies hire other companies to do things for them. So understanding what that is, trying to figure through what that looks like is really helpful. Similarly, if you're an education provider, if you think about it, is a learner hiring you to educate them because that's the job that you do? Or is a employee or employer hiring you to go educate people for them? Or is a learner actually trying to find work with you to get a job, not that they actually just want to get educated? And that, again, depending on how you think about what is that job that you are trying to solve, you might come out with very different solutions. And once you have a good idea of defining that job, understanding it, you can go out there and test it and research it and hear from folks to say, where is there an acute pain in that job? And that's usually where you might find the gems of solutions so that you can actually go do something exciting.
So on one side, you've got the types of solutions that broadly fall into one of 3 categories: better, faster, cheaper. And then once you've done that and you've figured out which area that you're tackling, you also have the ways to come up with different solutions, the jobs to be done framework, figuring out what job a company or person is hiring you for. So once you've built a version of your solution, let's say the minimum viable product, before you invest more time, money, or resources into improving it, you want to validate that the product you've actually built is solving the problem you actually set out to solve in the first place. How do you go about validating solutions, and how have you done this in the past?
Yeah, so I think there's typically 3 ways to think about it. And of course, there's probably many, many more. But 3 ways I've done it before is, one, of course, prototyping and testing. So build something even more lightweight than potentially an MVP, or as you said, you build an MVP, and it's probably at that point truly an MVP, not a minimum lovable product. So you might not be able to sell it, but at least you can test it and see it's really viable. So you can build something very quick, hack it together, run it, go to the market, test it out. The second way is actually many companies start off as a services business. So you might actually go find a customer that says, I have this problem. Can you help me figure it out? And you start out actually building more of a custom solution for them because you already have a need and they're paying you for it. And then you turn that into a product down the line. But you actually start out by actually building it for a customer to start. And then another way that I've seen it, which is really interesting, is in this day and age, is you actually just fake the product. So you actually create the marketing around the product, the value proposition, etc., and you just put it out there and see if people are excited about it, and you capture that interest. And so this is actually a little bit of that Kickstarter. You put out a couple ads, and the beauty of now with digital marketing is you can do that. It's not that expensive. Put something together and just test the demand. And I think for B2C in particular, that actually works quite well as a way to just say, can you generate enough buzz? Because in today's world, you can even raise money from these people who are willing to go fund it. And that is a way to actually get funding as well. So those are some different ways to validate the product, but it's always, of course, with real customers and really trying to see, do you have something that at some point there's enough demand and you can actually, hopefully, make money from?
Do you lean towards one of these approaches over another? There's certain contexts that you think each of these approaches is a better fit for?
Sure. So I think if you're thinking about something more B2B, typically they would probably lean more to a custom build services model because they are used to buying things like that. They are used to buying services. And in many cases, right, while every company might think that they are unique, if you are building it for one, oftentimes you have to at least extract a big portion of it to then productize and do something with that. So I think if you're doing more B2B, that's much easier to do that because obviously the B2C space, you don't have anybody to build a custom model for. Whereas in a B2C space, I do think you can do this more fake it, test demand, gauge what folks are really excited about it. Because oftentimes you could also take that to somebody like Emerge and say, see, look at how many people are excited about this already. If you give me money, I can go build it. And so that's a way to a little bit hedge your bets as well to do some validation.
Fantastic. Before we move on to the next topic of monetization, I had one more follow-up question. You touched on the idea of a minimum lovable product versus a minimum viable product. Can you briefly explain the difference between the two?
Sure. This term came up a while ago. I was listening to the former Ancestry chief product officer, and they gave a talk around this minimum level product. They used to call it the cupcake. And I was like, what is he talking about? And I think part of the idea about this was, look, you can have a minimum viable product that kind of works. It's not something that people can rally around or that you can really sell and be differentiated. But at the end of the day, what you're trying to do is also create advocates, because those early advocates are the ones that are really going to drive your success going forward. And so if you have a minimum viable, people kind of use it and say, great, I get it, but man, it's clunky, it's hard to use, it doesn't make me feel good, etc. It might be viable in the sense that it works, but it's not something that you could sell. Whereas I think if you think about a minimum lovable, you're trying to say, well, look, I can't build everything, but is there at least one slice of this where I can really show off the capabilities that I have, the differentiation that I'm bringing, and the value that I can demonstrate, such that that chief advocate can take that and talk about it, push for it, help go evangelize it elsewhere. Because I think when you have that, then that makes it so that as you think about then your business and your model, that truly then will allow you to kind of grow and scale.
Super helpful. So you can think about it as just ticking a box or scratching an itch of the key problem versus something that people fall in love with and shout about and bring new customers in for your product. Moving on from that, let's talk everyone's favorite topic, money. How do you make it? It's taken many years to convince folks that edtech could be profitable. And now in 2023, there are, I think, 30 edtech unicorns around the world, collectively valued at $89 billion. But it's still no easy feat, and monetization remains a big challenge for many founders in edtech. So how do you think about monetization and then building a business model?
Again, I'm an ex-consultant, so everything I think I was in threes. So, but then let's say there's three different types when I think about business models. There's a service-based business model. So if you're doing something that's based on effort, so how much effort I put in and I need to charge for that effort. And so there's different ways to think about that. Let's say if you're a bunch of contractors, your cost plus time, you're charging for that. Or you have for our strategy consultants, we charge for a fixed duration and a certain value, like X weeks for a project. Or it can be success or outcome based. So all your investment bankers, if a transaction happens, you get to charge X% of a fee, etc. So those are for services rendered, right? There's ways to charge for that. And those are great businesses. They're a little more intense in terms of kind of driving. But with AI and things like that, there's probably better ways to automate it. And those are the places where you might have a service to start, and then you start productizing pieces of those services. But this is a way that people buy stuff because they also understand it's the closest way to go see the tangible efforts with value, right? Because I can at least say, hey, there's like a team of like 3 people here working really hard. I'm willing to pay for that team of 3 people because I know what that's worth. So that's kind of more of a straightforward model. You then have the kind of product and platform models, and usually these are the user and volume based. So traditionally, you might have a licensed software and support. That was kind of in the old school model. And today, you still might be building something that you want to open source. So you might build an open source technology or something, and then you say, you know what, to use this open source technology, I might open it up, but I have certain code in there, etc., that if you want to use, you need a license for it. You need to pay for a license, or you need to pay for support for it. You could have a subscription model, and so that obviously is what's in vogue right now. Everybody wants a subscription business because it has a recurring revenue, it is steady, people can predict, and that's how you get also probably better valuations because people like seeing recurring revenue and be able to go process what that means. And that scales with user and volume so that you can see not only do you have same customer growth, but obviously as you acquire new customers, you can grow those. And then the last way of our product platform, of course, is our favorite ad funded. So it's like free to the user, but then you're using ads to fund all those products and platforms. It's a little harder in education just because of the high stakes, and you want to make sure that you're showing the right ads and so on and so forth. But another way to think about it is leads. So a lot of times there are platforms education that generate leads and our lead gen type activities. And that's also ad funded. It's just maybe call it a little bit different. So that's another way to think about it. Then I think the last area is just charging for content, right? So in education, one of the beauties is that we actually create content. Oftentimes, right, the core of education is actually the content and the learning. And so you can charge that. And again, different models there. It could be a subscription because it's low cost. You have a large library. And so charging individual transactions is like very painful for everybody. So you might say, you know what, instead of trying to charge you everything, I'm going to try to turn it into make it a subscription so I have that recurring revenue. And I just need to continue to deliver enough value in that subscription so that you continue to subscribe to it. And really you're renting, right? You're basically renting the content, like you're learning. The challenge there, of course, is do you have a compelling enough subscription? Because oftentimes education, right, is a point in time thing that people do, and then they come in and out of it. So as opposed to Netflix, where you might watch every weekend forever, as education subscription might not be the case. You might want to learn something, and then you say, I'm done with learning, I'll come back. The other model, of course, is transaction, right? One-time value, buy something, own it, you use it. So there's one-time value. There's also success and outcome-based. So I think you saw some of these income sharing agreements. That is a way of thinking through of like, hey, you go through the education, and rather than you paying up front, it's more success-based so that you make it on the back end. So those are different ways to think through, or three different buckets of business models. And again, depending on your service, are you providing ongoing value? Are you providing one-time value? Is it a big ticket item? Is it a smaller ticket item? And who's your audience? You might choose one of these models or a mix of these.
This is super helpful, the three buckets to think through. Could you give us a little bit more context into the factors to take into consideration when deciding between these different models and maybe the suitability in different contexts?
I worked at Cengage for a while. And when I showed up at Cengage, it was, let's sell a textbook. It was a very transaction model. One time, you sell a textbook, and this is also why like every 3-4 years, they had to come up with a new textbook because you had to keep getting people to buy that one-time thing. And what that created, actually, funny enough, was a used market, which was also one time, but that's a separate piece. But that was a model that we said was that they always did. They always thought of it as a one time. And so you had these huge spikes, right? And so one of the things we said was like, well, does that actually make sense? Is there a different way to do it? And what we were seeing was really interestingly, while we had one spike, the Amazons and Chens of the world were actually contributing to our spike, but turning it into a subscription by renting textbooks. So they would actually buy textbooks from us and then rent it to students on a regular basis. And so they actually turned a spike, what we thought was a one-time transaction, into a subscription business that allowed them to have steady revenue. And so one of the things we looked at was, why don't we just partner with them? Because it actually doesn't cost us that much to go create these textbooks in the first place. If we partnered with them, maybe we can actually get part of those economics, and then we could turn what we thought was a transaction type revenue stream into a subscription revenue stream. And so that's how we thought about it. And then as we went towards digital, we took that even further and said, well, now that we have a digital platform, do we sell it to you as a one-time, now you have to buy it for a course? Or if we said, because we have so many different courses and so many different offerings, could we add it together and give a student a subscription to all our digital products so that they can pick and choose and they don't have to feel like, hey, I took this or that, or I bought this and I now returned that, etc. It's like, you have access to all of it. And again, that allows us to then say, hey, semester to semester, you can always have access to it. Maybe it's throughout your 4 years, you're going to give access to the whole library. Hey, by the way, you might have not thought that you were interested in English Lit or history or science or biology or whatever type of course. Now that you have access to all of it, you take a look at the textbook. Take a look at those materials. Maybe it turns out you actually think it's kind of interesting and you can go take a class on that. But like historically, that might have been higher risk because you had to buy each of these separately. That's really the genesis of Cengage Unlimited. We looked at that and said, look, the cost of textbooks, cost of digital is so high. For us, we actually would love for you to just subscribe to Cengage and that we would continue to give you services and add value. So can we make that work? And so that's an example of thinking through what are the different models and how providing different models is actually part of your strategy to think through what actually makes the most sense and where do you want to get to. And of course, behind all this, tons of modeling on the back end, because obviously working for a traditional company, we had our existing revenue. And so we had to look at what would it look like, what would be cannibalization, how would the mix shift over time, How would we address the chip? How would we get reported in our financials differently? How would we actually fulfill it? Because obviously then you have to go have an inventory. The systems in the back end are very different. But ultimately, I think we looked at it as what's most beneficial to learners? How do they want to buy? And what makes the most sense in terms of one time, et cetera? And then how do we take more control of the ecosystem and of our own pricing? And so that's how we thought about it.
That's an incredibly helpful reminder that you're not set in one business model and it's something you have to continuously think about and evaluate, particularly with competitors. And you can change your business model and approach depending on the environment, depending on the feedback you're getting from customers. My next question is about striking the right balance between affordability and addressing acute pain points for learners, because in such a mission-driven sector like edtech, many founders find it quite difficult to strike that balance. And in any area of edtech, from K-12 to higher education to workforce development, there's always this who pays debate. Is it parents? Is it students? Is it governments, employers? How do you approach this and how do you decide who should pay for your product?
Yeah, so I think it partly depends on who gets the value from it. And then part of it also just depends on what do you try to do initially and what you want to do at scale. Because I think there's definitely situations where if you want to start with the most difficult buyer, that might take you a very, very long time to get traction versus if you try to start on the sides and then you edge your way in. But I think a couple of different models or go-to-market models look like this. Obviously, direct to user, consumer, everybody understands it. You just go over the top, right? You're doing digital marketing to go after a consumer, make them aware of it. You create some kind of maybe celebrities and other types of things to promote it. TikTok, etc. out there. So that's a direct-to-consumer model. And the decision there is an individual thinks through something, wants to do it. And if you look at most of the kind of marketing around college degrees or college programs or even like MOOC programs or certificate programs, most of that is B2C. It's basically Google AdWords, things like that. And that's great. And by the way, that's also probably the one way in which you get scaled the fastest if it's successful, because it's easy to access directed over top consumers in that way. And you're really building a kind of a marketing engine. Then you have certain ones where the decision maker gets to dictate to the buyer or user that they're going to use it. Think as example, you're selling to a parent and your parent is going to force the kid to go to the kind of coding camps or karate classes. Or it's like the parent says, you know what, you're going to do it. I'm going to pay for it. You will go do it. And so while on one hand, of course, you're serving the learner, you want to make sure the learner is happy and excited about the program. Really, you're selling to the decision maker because they actually have the money and they are the one that's forcing the learner. Tutoring services is a great example. Yes, there are some people that pay for tutoring themselves. Oftentimes, including myself, I will go pay for Chinese tutoring for my kid and make my kid sit in front of the computer to learn Chinese. And so that is a slightly different, that's a different model. And so how do you reach parents, parent groups? Maybe it's like word of mouth referrals. Maybe it's from the school to try to reach the parents. Right? Then there's a situation where decision maker recommends to the buyer. And so this is now even tougher because now you have to win the decision maker, but just winning the decision maker is not enough. The buyer still has their own ability to decide if they want to buy. So traditionally, if you think about it, that's like what IT used to do. All these people sell IT, and to a certain extent today, all these people sell to IT. IT says, you have to use this system, this email, this, etc. And then as a user, you're like, yeah, okay, I like that, but I might still use my own thing. So there's a little bit of that in the mix. But I think the best example in education is higher ed, where a professor says, I'm going to adopt this courseware and this book or textbook. I'm going to require it in my class. But ultimately, student may decide, I still want to buy it. And so you're still selling that. Again, InStride actually has a somewhat similar thing. We go sell to a CEO or CHRO, and we say, hey, this is amazing strategic education program that's aligned to what you're trying to do. But a big part of what we still have to do is make sure employees are aware of it, employees are excited about it, is we're not forcing employees to go take advantage of education. We're encouraging them to do it because we do think it's life-changing for them. Of course, you have a government, like a central one, right, where it's a government or somebody. K-12 is often like this, right? In the U.S., states buy every 7 years. They do this big song and dance, say, hey, guys, we are about to go procure for the next 7 years. Everybody show up, and then they kind of evaluate, and then they say, hey, for American U.S. history, we're going to pick these 3 providers. We're going to buy from these 3, and can be very binary. You either win it, which is tens of $millions, or you don't. in which case it might be a 0. And that's in many cases why a lot of the publishers actually exited the K-12 because it was so lumpy and so difficult to match. And then lots of these is more traditional B2B, where you might sell, oftentimes for us, we try to sell to a CEO or CHRO, but in the B2B, you might also sell to L&D, you might also sell to an IT contact, or you might even sell to individual business leaders who want a freemium service, so then they buy.
Super helpful. So when you have a decision maker that's separate from the actual end user, you need to sell twice to both of them. All of these were incredibly helpful go-to-market strategies, something that's often underestimated by founders because it's this easy trap to fall into of believing that you've found a genuine problem and you've come up with a strong solution and a viable business model. It's easy to think that your product or service should be selling itself, but the go-to-market strategy is really this key pillar to get right on that path to product market fit. With all of these competing models, is there any useful advice you have on honing down on your initial go-to-market strategy?
A lot of it depends on your solution. A lot of it depends on where you think you can deliver the most value. And then I think the third is who actually has the money today. So for example, if you're doing something like, let's say in K-12, your choices are either like the parent or the districts or the states, let's say in the US. So you can sell to a superintendent individually, and then there's X number of those individual schools, 50 odd states. So there's states, and you can choose that way, or there's parents. And so is your solution more of a voluntary get parents to buy type solution? Or is it something where you actually say, you know what, I think I can get people to mandate it and buy it, right, in bulk? And are you willing to live with the fact that it becomes more binary and you have fewer customers on that side? Whereas on the parent side, obviously, hey, one parent doesn't want to do it, that's fine, do the next parent. And so part of it is depending on your solution and your level of where you think your value is in that chain. And do you want to set yourself up as a big volume, smaller ticket, probably type of thing? Or are you a smaller volume, big ticket? I don't know necessarily if one is better than the other, but I will say probably that the more volume, smaller ticket is generally a little bit easier to show traction, especially in the early days, because I think as a early stage startup, it is hard to invest enough to try to win these big ones, especially when you're competing with a lot of big ones. And often with these kind of smaller number of customers, bigger buys, because it can be so binary, it is quite difficult for you to potentially manage your cash flow and all of those when you're going to that market. So that's part of the challenge, but it's also why you see that's generally also why there's not a ton of innovation there, because it is much harder to try to win and be successful in those markets. I guess that might be one of the big considerations to think through. And then I think the other piece, as already mentioned, just in terms of advice for startup founders, I think most founders are probably generally more product centric because they're generally the people that come up with the solution. Like they might not have started out as like selling a bunch of stuff. They probably started out saying, hey, I think there's some problems here. I want to come up with a product to go, or like some solution for it. So they more generally have a more product bent, right? Like including myself, right? I like building products and I think that's super fun and solve problems. And like you said, I think they all solve themselves because I built such an awesome product. And I think oftentimes then there might be some blind spots around when we go to market. We say, let's get somebody that's a chief revenue officer or go to market person, and we're just going to let them deal with it. And we're going to build an amazing product. And I think for good founders, unfortunately, probably going to really have to do it yourself because there's probably at least initially, because there's probably nobody that knows your product and then can speak about your product or can be as passionate about a product than you are. And so even if it's not your comfort zone of going out there and selling, so to speak, it's almost thinking about it as going out there and evangelize it and really being proud of your baby to a certain extent and doing that. And of course, you have a sales team that will then help you close and sell it. But oftentimes you're going to have to be front and center because you can teach somebody and you can go get people to do it. But until folks see you with your passion do it, it's a very different type of activity.
No one can replace you as the founder in evangelizing your product. We have time perhaps for one quick question in our quick fire round, perhaps two. I'm going to ask you a quick question and you respond with a one-line response. If you could make two stakeholders collaborate more closely to drive more meaningful edtech innovation, which would they be and why?
I think the employers and government, honestly. Employers today have such an outside say on what governments do, which is scary. It's all right, but they do. And government can make such big changes just by sweep of a pen that if they just actually work together, there's probably just tremendous opportunity. As an example, there's a $5,250 tax-free education coverage here in the US where corporations can invest from 1986. So despite the fact that tuition has gone up exponentially, the amount that a corporation can invest tax-free for a learner is still 50 to 50. And if employers came together with the government and said, hey, I'm actually willing to invest $10,000, $20,000 in an employee's education, and the employee doesn't have to pay tax on it, I think would actually go a long way in continuing to solve this crisis around student debt and the cost of education.
Last one, what's the most rewarding impact you've witnessed an edtech solution have on learners?
Seeing learners have hope. It's actually really interesting. I've been very fortunate. I think a lot of folks that we know day to day in our personal networks are probably more fortunate. And I think when we talk to our learners, many of the learners have actually had to cut short their educational journey because of certain things that happen in life. And they get stuck. And when you get stuck, then you actually start losing hope, right? That nothing's going to change. This is what my life is going to be like. And you start losing confidence. And when an employer or just anybody believes in them and is willing to invest in them, and then from there they take advantage of education, they actually start acting differently because they suddenly have hope that if they pursue something, they can actually go change their lives for the better. And we saw this recently, and it was amazing. We had one of our partners here, a delivery service provider, was actually just talking about this. He had drivers that did deliveries. And these drivers traditionally would just clock in, clock out, they would churn through, and it was just tough to motivate them. It was tough to get them to show up. And when they were able to talk about their education program, and these folks started getting into those education programs, and those people started saying, oh my gosh, like I can do this. I can get a better job. I can do something different. There is a career for me here. And I don't have to stay as a guy lifting packages for the rest of my life. I can do something different. And they actually had a learner just recently completed their IT certification course and got a job at an IT firm. And what's funny about that is you would think that the delivery service provider, the employer, would be like, oh, I can't believe you're leaving me. But how happy the delivery service provider was for that employee because they know them. It's actually somebody they know. And to see that person suddenly go from somebody that felt like they couldn't care and that they were stuck to somebody that felt like they had hope and was grateful for that hope, excited about the prospects of the future. I think we started out, this conversation around impact and what I see education as. And I do think education, honestly, is hope for the future.
What a great note to end on, hope for the future. Thank you so much, Jonathan, for joining us and sharing your journey in learning. This has been incredibly helpful.
Thank you, Zara.
Thanks for listening to the Emerge Product Market Fit Academy. If you enjoyed this episode, please like it, follow our channel, and if you're feeling generous, share it with a friend.